following is a text exchange which occurred between brothers on July 25th, 2021. 5:54 p.m. I just found a spot where dozens, if not hundreds of e-scooters were standing ominously, clearly waiting for us to ride them into the apocalypse. I've survived the Cleveland Browns and a pandemic, and yet, this scene under a highway left me feeling that the end was closer than ever before.
Is this what anarchists ride to war these days?
I can't imagine them riding anything else except perhaps Segways. Straight from the heartland, this is Things I Text My Brother. Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of Things I Text My Brother, a series of conversations which have taken place between the brothers Drouillard on subjects spanning the neighborhood and the globe, which will hopefully leave you smarter, kinder, and better looking. Today we're going to jump off from that dramatic reading that you just heard and discuss the topics therein. Maybe we'll talk about lime juicers. Maybe we'll talk about bazooka Vespas. Maybe we'll talk about asteroids, Steve Jobs, Paul Blart, and necrosignatures. But we haven't plotted an exact course because we want you to join us on that journey. That's how it works on Things I Text My Brother. I'm Jeff. This is Brad. Let's talk about our texts. But before we venture boldly into the realm of micromobility that we discussed a moment ago, we need to take a look back because it's always important to take time to cleanse ourselves of our past sins and to continue our boundless quest for self-improvement through worthless information. Thus, it's time for ablutions and edification. This week, it's got to start right here at home with me. I have an ablution, and this one is brought to us by none other than Father Art. Have you heard of this man?
I have. I've known him my entire life.
Yes, and he knows us too well, and he also knows that in the episode in which we discussed murder ballads and coconuts, we were discussing Harry Nilsson songs, specifically Coconut, and I said that we listened to those on 35 records. Well, everybody who has half a brain knows that those records were called 45s, and I feel very stupid, but I also feel as if I'm cleansed, so that makes me happy.
Well, I have to admit, I went right along with it. You said 35. I said, that sounds right.
You certainly did, but now that we're cleansed, it's time for us to go on and learn some new things. What do you want to teach the world, Brad?
Well, in episode 10, Walloon Shenanigans and Legless Lizards, we talked about snakes and, you guessed it, legless lizards.
Classic.
We talked about what the difference is, and if you're a lizard and you have no legs and you look like a snake, aren't you just a snake? I said probably not. You said, well, maybe not scientifically, but they should be. Just to clear it up, they are different types of animals. Both snakes and legless lizards likely had legs at one point. Legless lizards are mostly tail, as much as 2/3 of their body, according to the Washington Post, while snakes have short tails.
What?
Yeah.
Snakes are all tails, Brad.
Apparently, just short tails. That probably doesn't help much, as body versus tail is a pretty confusing measure, as we just discussed, right? But here's some other things that are probably more helpful. Snakes don't have eyelids, external ears, or usually tiny vestigial legs. Usually, because there are some snakes that do have tiny vestigial legs.
What is a vestigial leg?
A vestigial leg is a leg that's useless. Like if a human had a tail, it would be a vestigial tail because it doesn't serve a purpose other than maybe for looks.
What if you were using that tail to swing around on branches?
Well, if it could actually do so, then it's just a tail. It's not vestigial.
Oh, well, I learned something.
Yeah. Legless lizards usually have all those things, eyelids, external ears, and tiny legs of some kind, although not always.
Sure.
Hence the vestigial being a small remnant of what was once larger. So the legless lizards kinda don't have that piece, but they have the other parts. So they're still lizards.
Yeah, and they're 2/3 tail, and snakes are all tail. No, snakes are no tail.
Tiny tail. Short tail.
I did hear that you said something in there had an ear. I don't know if it was a legless lizard or a snake.
Legless lizards have ears, yes.
Do snakes not have ears?
Not external ears.
Really?
External ears.
Not external ears. Okay. We'll have the audience fact check that one. But I'm going to bring you some other edification on the subject of what does or does not have ears.
Ooh, I'm ready.
Back in our 15th episode, Anthems and the Evaporation of Our Enemies, you were talking about
birds.
Something about birds having ears. I don't really recall the context. And I asked the question, do birds have ears? Which I was genuinely asking. And you said, yeah, of course they have ears. And you laughed at me. So I looked it up and I proved you absolutely right. Birds do, of course, have ears. They have no external ear structure, which makes them a lot like a legless lizard that's 2/3 tail.
Snake makes them like snakes. We can't make ablutions in our edifications.
We've done it before, we'll do it again. Usually these internal ears are located just behind and below the eye, often covered by a soft, loose patch of feathers which keep out the dust and wind and enemies. And most birds have excellent hearing.
Because they have ears.
But the real question is, what percentage of a bird is its tail?
100%.
Well, it's a bit hard to determine whether we learned anything in this round or whether we just created more mistakes. But either way, that segment's over, and now we're going to talk about micromobility, e-scooters, segways, or whatever you want to start us off with. What you got?
Well, the first thing that I want to talk about is the picture that you sent. Hopefully you're putting that up on our Instagram. You sent a picture of a collection of scooters sitting ominously out in the wild that you just happened across.
Ah, yes, near a highway overpass in a park on the edge of the Scioto River in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, so I saw the picture and I thought flock of scooters, and the first thing that jumped to my mind before you continued the conversation was flock of Smeagol's. So at one point in time, I found a picture on the internet of a bunch of Smeagol's, golems from...
You're saying Smeagol, right?
Smeagol. Smeagol, golem from Lord of the Rings, with the haircut from the band Flock of Seagulls. And I posted the flock of Smeagol's. I printed them out at work, and I posted them all over the building, just randomly, one day, to try to confuse and scare people when they came into the office on a Monday morning.
That's well done.
And I felt like that would be a comparable amount of surprise for people as coming onto a large lot of scooters.
I beg to differ. I think that a person in the modern world would probably be more alarmed to see a giant outcropping of Smeagol's than they would Lime scooters.
Yes, in the real world, but I'm just saying about equivalent.
Which world are you operating in?
I'm operating in a world where there's a piece of paper hanging on the wall as you enter the stairwell. Not quite as intimidating as real Smeagol dressed as Flock of Seagull.
Oh, you were saying that they would be alarmed by the picture of the flock of Smeagol's, not an actual flock of Smeagol's on the waterfront or something.
Maybe just as disconcerting on a Monday morning, though, when you haven't had your coffee and you walk in and boom, there's a flock of Smeagol's, and you're trying to figure out, one, who would do such a thing, why they would do such a thing, and why it's so creepy. Anyway, I was thinking about that, and it took me down the path of what would I find the most creepy? Because I can see why an unexpected field of scooters sitting there ominously might make you feel a little bit off. And I was thinking to myself, if I were walking along, what would it be that I would see that would make me feel that way? And I feel like it would be baby dolls from like the Victorian era. If I saw a field full of baby dolls from the Victorian era, I think I'd be pretty scared.
Yeah, true.
But then I was thinking about other things that wouldn't have been as scary, but were kind of cool to find. So I was thinking about the terracotta warriors, the Shaanxi clay figures, right?
Yeah, that's a very similar formation. So I can see that connection. Yeah.
But then I didn't realize, I hadn't known that they were life-size.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that I ever knew that. So it's life-size soldiers and horses, the terracotta warriors. But when they found them, they were mostly lying around in pieces and on their sides and stuff. So it wasn't as intimidating, but I think more creepy because they were like all these life-size figures laying broken down as if you had just entered Pompeii for the first time, right? And they had all those bodies frozen.
What if you came upon a natural setting, which was very much like that? I propose Bryce Canyon, which is actually a large naturally occurring amphitheater with hoodoos, which are basically like the terracotta warriors or the scooters standing up in this giant canyon. If you came upon that with no knowledge of it existing, would it scare you less than or equal to scooters, terracotta warriors, and whatever else you mentioned?
Describe to me what a hoodoo is.
A hoodoo is a column of stone that has worn away because basically erosion wears away at its sides, but it has a harder stone on top that prevents it from wearing away the top. So you're left with these long fins of stone that then get worn down. You can imagine a hand, like a webbed hand, where the webs wear away and you're just left with the fingers standing up. And then you imagine this giant 12-mile across amphitheater full of these formations just standing up in this bowl, this naturally occurring bowl, as if they were terracotta warriors.
I don't know. I don't feel like they look like people, but they certainly are the opposite of the Japanese national anthem where the pebbles were growing into rocks. These were rocks growing into pebbles or smaller columns.
Who's to say whether they're people or not? At some point, people didn't realize that Soylent Green was people, Brad. Then it was.
So Bryce Canyon, you said Bryce Canyon, these hoodoos?
Hoodoos.
Hoodoos in Bryce Canyon?
I don't know how you do the voodoo that hoodoo.
I don't drink Yoo-hoo either.
Well, people are going to be seeing more and more of these scooters. Apparently, micromobility is a big thing. And scooters, I was just trying to learn a little bit more about them because I travel, I'm in a lot of cities, and I see them in a lot of these places, and I see people crashing, and I just wonder, like, how many of them are out there? And I read some market analysis thing that said in the year 2020, electric scooters globally had a $19.4 billion market share, which was expected to go up to $34.7 billion within the next decade or so. And that's all based on these electric scooters. You can park them wherever you want, and they're allegedly environmentally friendly, even though that is somewhat challenged. And of course, they advertise them as being convenient, carefree, and safe. Well, what I noticed about them is that they are parked in inappropriate places, thrown into rivers, on the tops of buildings, fractured and broken into pieces, sticking out of trash cans. And really, it's just a lot of people have decided that scooters ain't it. And you can go on to Reddit and YouTube, TikTok, the mainstream media, and then Twitter and Instagram. And you can find accounts like Bird Graveyard, which is just these things in every setting where they don't belong. You can see in other accounts scooters behaving badly, which is exactly what it says. And it's basically a reign of terror that has been unleashed on society. And yet they are really convenient. I rode one exactly one time. I enjoyed it. Have you ridden one, Brad?
You have ridden one exactly one more time than I have.
I rode it outside the Doodah parade, and it was a good time. But would I be sad to see them go? Not necessarily, because they're also getting parked in doorways and fire zones and ruining access to certain areas for people with various disabilities who have mobility issues or vision issues or whatever the case may be. They're getting in the way. So I wouldn't be terrified to see them go. But it did bring up a thing for me. I was thinking this is a new transportation, more or less. Scooters have been around for a while, but the whole electric thing, park them wherever you want, that's all new. And that got me thinking about previous transportation technologies and what did the world say when those came out? And basically, how scared were we and how much did we think that those things would be the end of the world? Because you know we did. I was looking back, I found something by a cultural anthropologist named Genevieve Bell, and she said in the Wall Street Journal tech site that extremely fearful reactions to new technology are age old. Case in point, in this article that I was reading, it said that critics of steam locomotives worried that the speed of trains would cause many problems. Give me a problem that a steam train would cause in the mind of somebody back whenever steam locomotives were invented.
They could give off steam and create new weather patterns.
Okay.
They could explode while being driven because of the steam engine.
Sure, those are both very reasonable things to be scared of. But two that I found were that some people were worried that going that fast would cause people to melt. And other people were concerned that the speed of train might cause the uteruses to fly out of women's bodies.
That seems unlikely.
Yep.
I'm not sure how to respond to that, to be honest.
Moving on to the New York Times, July 15th, 1881, somebody wrote in saying, I consider the bicycle to be the most dangerous threat to life and property ever invented. And of course, cars, horseless carriages certainly drew their fair share of concern in the 1890s. Some people were concerned about what it would be like to drive something without a second intelligence. And I thought that was really interesting. When you're driving a horse, you're relying on your intelligence as the human, but you're also relying on the horse's intelligence as a secondary control system, which I thought that was really interesting, especially as we now talk about cars driving on their own and artificial intelligence and all that.
Right.
We're talking about driving a vehicle with the vehicle being one of two forms of intelligence. And that kind of blew my mind. So yeah, phobias of new technology and new transportation specifically is something that's not new. Maybe it's only natural for all these accounts and all this negativity to be attached to e-scooters because really we have to figure out how to incorporate them into our society, and that's what we're doing right now. When cars first came out in England, there was a rule saying that you could drive a car but only if you had a person with a red flag walking in front of you. Right now, we're figuring out how to incorporate e-scooters into society. we have stopped short of having a person with a red flag walking in front of the person riding the e-scooter. But as I've seen people riding e-scooters around, I think that might not be a bad idea at the moment. Do you think that we'll ever get to the place that we incorporate successfully e-scooters into a well-functioning transportation model?
I think in the fancy futuristic cities that people are starting to plan and build, if done appropriately, and there are special places and lanes for like e-scooters and segways and stuff, I think, yeah. I think if we're trying to layer scooters into already crazy places that aren't really built, Boston with those tiny streets and the weird directions they go, it's not real safe and easy to ride there, and you can't really suddenly build it. It just doesn't exist.
Where do scooters belong? Do they belong in the street? Do they belong in the sidewalk? Or do we have to literally build new cities for there to be a place for them?
I think they belong in bike lanes, most likely.
Which we're certainly getting more of.
Right. And that helps as well. But I think to do it right, for them to coexist peacefully and happily, I believe that it has to be new cities that are built anticipating new technologies and making allowances for things like scooters and hoverboards and segways.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring up segways, and that was a part of our original conversation. We briefly mentioned segways leading to the apocalypse, and I was part of the Get Off My Lawn crowd on segways. And I kind of say that in a past tense because I didn't really know this, but apparently the two-wheeled, self-balancing original model of Segways was discontinued in June 2020. And by that point, Segways, as we think of Segways, the company has now expanded in a bunch of other things. But that two-wheel model that we tend to think of when we're talking about Segways only accounted for 1.5% of the company's revenue, which means they have branched well away from there, mostly, in fact, into e-scooters and things like that. I thought that was really interesting because back in the early 2000s, you had people like Steve Jobs saying that the Segway was going to be as big as the PC. You had Jeff Bezos saying that Segways were one of the most famous and anticipated product introductions of all time. And the founder of Segway, the inventor, a guy named Dean Kamen, said that the Segway would do for walking what the calculator did for the pen and pencil, which is part of the reason that I hated Segways to start with, because the last thing I could think of Americans needing was getting rid of their pen and pencil, when in this case, the pen and pencil was the ability to use their legs functionally. But that's what Segways were kind of proposing to do. And yet, in the course of like a decade and a half, instead of being this thing that changed the world as big as the PC, the Segway became most notable for being ridden by a fictional mall cop and for spilling tourists into hedge lines and oncoming traffic on YouTube videos. One of them hit Usain Bolt after one of his races. George Bush tumbled off one in Maine. And in 2010, there was a mining millionaire named Jimmy Heselden who had just purchased the Segway company 10 months earlier. And Jimmy Heselden died driving his Segway off of a cliff and dropping 42 feet down to his death. Now, it's worth mentioning that he did so while being courteous, most likely backing up to let a dog and a dog walker come by him. But the guy who owned the company died on the Segway. So Segway kind of delivered on some of the horror stories that were originally proposed along with it.
The way they hyped up the Segway human transporter, I mean, I remember this. It was 2001. They called it Project Ginger, and they were hyping it up. It's going to be this world changing, transportation changing concept. And I'm thinking hydrogen engine, something that's really going to make a big difference. And then I watched the unveil, and it's a scooter. And a $3,000 scooter at that. I can get a Vespa for $1,500 at that time. It's half the price. It's safer. And I can put baskets on it and store stuff and carry things. And they have electric ones. I'm like, it's a much better technology. How is this changing the world? It didn't feel like it was then. It clearly didn't change it in the way they anticipated. Did it lead to better acceptance of electric scooters? Did it lead to hoverboards that kids are riding all over the place? My kids have one. I can't ride it. I fall off. I have no balance. Did it lead to that? Maybe. But it didn't change the world. At the time, it felt like a complete con job. This guy had been getting investments and hyping all these people up, and it's going to change the world, and he comes out with it, and nobody can afford it. And even if you can, you look like an idiot. Have you ridden a Segway?
No, but I've insulted people riding Segways countless times, and I will continue to do so. I try to avoid doing so when people are actively falling over. I've seen some pretty hellish collisions and crashes, almost entirely single drivers rolling into stuff or just frankly falling off. The place where Segway truly did deliver is on taking people who should not have been on a risky form of transportation, convincing them that it's fun, easy, and joyful, and then launching them into a park bench or the side of a tree. Segways were phenomenal at that.
Yeah. And I was thinking of other things about transportation that have made me nervous. I'm nervous about just about everything. But when I lived in Mexico, I would ride this bus every day, and in the window was, a sticker that you could read from the inside. And you'd be sitting in this bus in a crowded city that you're driving through. And Guanajuato had a lot of the streets were in tunnels, but you're riding in this bus in this congested tunnel, and you look up and it says, God is my eyes. That's what the bus driver has sitting over his head. And I'm thinking, no, 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 you are your eyes. You drive the bus. Let God help you in the rest of your life, but please drive the bus while I'm on it.
That does seem risky. Well, let me ask you a question then.
All right.
If there was an enemy who was leading us into the apocalypse on any type of vehicle, what vehicle in your mind would they be most likely to be using?
It's an interesting question because I was listening to a podcast recently about the history of Persia and Abyssinia and that area. And they were talking about the different transportational technologies that changed and what made different groups more dominant as they came through with the chariot and the horse warriors and all these things. Over time, that answer would certainly have changed. But if I were to pick what would be my expectation of what people bringing the apocalypse would be riding, I don't know.
I asked the question and I don't even understand it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I might have said Segways at one point in time, but I don't know that I feel that way anymore.
Yeah.
I would say some sort of a hybrid creature. So like those commercials where they got the half man, half motorcycle.
Yeah.
I think that might be what the apocalypse might be riding on.
Oh, now if I was going to lead society into the apocalypse and I could choose the vehicle, I'm going to go with one that the Army Expeditionary Warrior Experiments of February 2020, they were testing out a vehicle, and I saw a picture of it. Apparently, there's this thing at Fort Benning that tests new technologies every year. And so I looked at a list of 68 of them that were tested in the year 2020. But one of them was a Segway ATV scooter thing, like on steroids. It basically, I guess it came in a 2-wheel model and a 4-wheel model. Just imagine a Segway with giant inflatable wheels that were comically large, that were like all-terrain wheels, and put a guy that looks like Rambo just like blasting over this dusty terrain in a hellfire of bullets on this jumbo scooter. If I'm leading people into the apocalypse, we're riding that and we're going to go out in style. I love it. It was called the Easy Raider. And I don't know if the Army did approve it, but if I'm not aged out and I hear that that thing did make it in the Army, I might go down to my local recruiting station tomorrow. But if I could go back in history and lead the charge into the apocalypse, in the 1950s, the French came up with this thing for their paratroopers. And the whole idea was for them to have an anti-tank weapon that had high mobility. So basically, the Ministry of Defense had a Vespa producing plant in France create a small, portable anti-tank scooter. But it was just this Vespa 150 TAP, which actually stands essentially for paratroopers. It would give you a full-scale howitzer on this motorcycle. The pictures are hilarious. It goes from the back of the bike under the seat. I guess you have to like straddle this howitzer thing and it sticks out the front. It's not designed to be fired while driving, although I guess technically it could be. But this vehicle would go 41 miles per hour after being dropped, by the way, out of a plane, landing with pallet and hay bales. It would land and then they could drive it off at 41 miles per hour. And they would have this M20 rifle on it that would weigh 114 pounds. They'd pull it out of the bike, they'd put it on a tripod and blast it at tanks. And they actually used this effectively against guerrilla type tactics and other things in French Indochina and in Algeria. They used this weapon. But that seems like a vehicle on which to ride into the apocalypse, if you ask me.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, you think about history. Like if you ask the Romans what was the scary military vehicle, it would have been elephants, right?
Oh yeah,
Hannibal and elephants,
yep.
and the Greeks against the Persians because that was chariots. And William Wallace, it was heavy horse. No one has won a battle without heavy horse.
Yeah, and everybody knows that Braveheart was as sound historical accuracy-wise as our podcast. So
Indeed.
But yeah, give me either the Bazooka Vespa or the Easy Raider Segway scooter on steroids, and I'll charge into battle. But all of this also got me wondering, okay, maybe the Vespa scooter, since it's no longer being produced, it only lasted a few years, Maybe that isn't going to be the transportation that we take into the apocalypse. Maybe Segways aren't going to be the cause of the apocalypse. I mean, it's possible that the world will end at the hands of something other than people riding Segways. So I was looking up what are the most likely causes of the apocalypse, and there are plenty of scientists who have varying opinions on that. You're a smart man, though, Brad. Give me some of your expectations for what things would be the actual cause of the apocalypse scientifically here on our planet as we know it.
I feel like disease.
Disease. That was rated a 2 out of 10 in terms of seriousness by Brian Walsh, the man who wrote End Times, A Brief Guide to the End of the World.
It's weak.
Weak.
Yeah.
It's weak. Yeah, your diseases are weak. Basically, he said that diseases, which have probably killed the most people historically, do some incredible damage, but they'll never quite eliminate those little pockets. And he said, as long as we have pockets of a few hundred here or there, whatever,
All right.
human life can probably sustain itself and over the course of time rebuild. So if we're talking actual apocalypse wiping out the entire population of humankind, your disease is weak. Give me something else.
Running out of water.
It sounds dangerous. I think it would work.
Yeah. All of the volcanoes erupting at one time around the world.
Yeah, it wouldn't even take that. Supervolcanos were one of his highest rated dangers. It was a 6 out of 10 because they can basically drop the global temperature by 15 degrees. If it's dropping the temperature, basically blocking out the sun, that would cause a chain of things that could conceivably wipe out all of humankind. So yeah, supervolcanoes were a good one. I was recently inside a supervolcano at Yellowstone National Park. And I thought, man, if this is going to happen and we're all going to die from it, I want to be there when it happens.
Yeah, you want to be in the room when it happens. That's right, yeah.
So that offer's on the table.
How about the return of the ancient aliens?
Yeah, aliens, he said those were hard to quantify. A couple other things he said. One that was very difficult to factor in is what AI could do to us if artificial intelligence takes over. But he was careful to point out, what if when AI takes over, they don't actually want to kill us? What if they're kinder than we as humans are?
I'll make a great pet.
I'll make great pets.
We'll make great pets. Make great pets.
He said that they might just want to control us in the same way that we have controlled other animals.
But they would only have two dances, the robot and the robo boogie.
Yes. The other one that always comes up because all the movies like to depict it is asteroids hitting us. He said not a big deal because we could stop that.
We're going to shoot people into space to go and knock them out, right? Didn't we have a movie about that?
Yeah, there are lots of. What do you think about me saying we could stop that?
I could not care.
I've always enjoyed that turn of phrase, even though it doesn't come from our land. Brian Walsh also pointed out that one thing that will help us figure out what is likely to end us, or if our society is going to end at the hand of one of these cataclysmic events, is if we start seeing necrosignatures as we explore the universe, then we'll know that we're probably doomed. Do you know what a necrosignature is, Brad?
I have no idea, but if I were to guess what a necrosignature was, it would have to be related to, I don't know.
Well, obviously death, but necrosignatures would be proof of dead civilizations. So if we roll out to Neptune and find proof that a bunch of people used to live on Neptune, then he says we need to start getting real concerned, because if other people had civilizations that disappeared, it means that there's a very good chance that ours will, and there's a very good chance that we'll do it to ourselves.
Well, now I know what necrosignatures are and hoodoos.
Yep, and I've never seen the Paul Blart movie about Segways, but
I have seen I've seen the Mall Cop movie. It was okay.
Was it? Because it seems like
I mean, it was no mall rats, but it was okay.
Oh, nothing's going to be mall rats. That's a high bar.
Yes. We talked a little bit about movies and things that were disappointing.
Yep.
We also talked about random things you would see in the wilderness that would make you nervous or feel disconcerting.
Chupacabra.
I did an internet search for weird collections in the wild that could make you nervous. And I found absolutely nothing. But I did run across a museum that asked people, and this was August or September of 2021, I think. They asked people to post from their museums the creepiest thing in their collection.
Ooh, do tell.
Hashtag creepiest objects.
That's a winner right there.
Right? And there's some weird stuff in there for sure. There was a collection from a museum in England where a gentleman made dioramas from crab parts. Crab claws and crab legs. So there are people made out of crab claws and crab legs playing poker, mining for gold.
When did this man make these?
In the Victorian age.
And how long was he institutionalized?
I didn't go any deeper. I saw the picture and I said, that's creepy. And I said, it fits.
It's probably for the best.
Yeah, so creepiest objects. If you want to be creeped out by some weird museum collections, that's your hashtag.
I like it. Well, Brother Brad, there's one man who will never be in anybody's collection of creepiest objects and will never be found in terracotta form. His name is Father Art, and we're going to ask him some questions.
How fast do you think you could drive a rented e-scooter before you lost control?
10 yards.
That's not a speed.
Oh, 10 miles an hour.
Okay. Have you ever seen a person melt or lose their uterus due to the speed they were traveling in a steam locomotive?
No.
Do you think that's even possible?
Yes.
How fast do you think the steam locomotive will have to go or stop to make that happen?
300 miles an hour.
Ooh. If there was a Victorian-era man who built dioramas out of crab parts, crab legs and crab claws, would you find it odd?
No, not if it was in Baltimore.
Choose a scenario which you feel might lead to the apocalypse, and then craft the headline for the next day's newspaper for when it occurs.
A massive nuclear bomb would be the cause, and my headline would be, "That's all, folks."
Well, folks, now that we've heard from Father Art, it means that our time together is coming to an end for this episode. We've said just about everything that we're prepared to say about supervolcanoes, people being melted by trains, projectile uteruses, and dioramas made from crab parts. But fear not, just as soon as we can dig back into the archives and find another gem of a text exchange, there will be another episode coming your way. In the meantime, you can head over to our Instagram page at Things I Text My Brother Podcast to drop us a note about what you liked or what you didn't like, or to tell us about something that we got totally wrong. We might even have enough time to tell a friend, an enemy, and a total stranger to give us a listen as well. If you manage to do any of that, Fraternity of Drouillards will be forever grateful. But most importantly, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
And we stopped for lunch because we had a small child off of Interstate 80 at
Whose small child did you have?
Our small child. Grant was small.
Oh. I thought you just took one somewhere in Pennsylvania.